Everywhere you turn in Salisbury Cathedral, you see another part of its great history. Here to tell me more is tour guide Tricia Glass. Tricia, we're so blessed with the history in our churches and cathedrals across the UK, but what sets Salisbury apart?
Salisbury's unique. It's the only purpose-built cathedral in the country. There was nothing here. It was a greenfield site. Foundation stone laid in 1220, and only 38 years later, the cathedral was completed.
Wow, 38 years doesn't seem long for a building of this size.
No. The cathedral was finished, but they didn't have the spire. They added the spire on later.
And the spire is the tallest in the UK?
It is 123 metres or 404 feet. And it weighs about 6,500 tonnes, so you've got this incredible extra weight on very shallow foundations. We've only got 4 feet of foundations. Middle of the 15th century, they were surveying the cathedral. They looked up and thought, the pillars are bending. So at the spire crossing, that extra weight caused the pillars to bend.
So these are the bendy pillars?
These are the famous bendy pillars. But they were pretty good. They realised they put in strainer arches, they put in more buttressing, and there's been no further movement since.
Is it safe?
It's okay. It's pretty safe. If you see me run, you come behind me.
One of the traditions that's very special to Salisbury is the medieval custom of a child from the choir becoming bishop for a few weeks. Honora is only the third girl ever to hold the title of chorister bishop. And now you're a chorister. I was a chorister as well, but I've never heard of a chorister bishop. Can you tell me more?
The chorister bishop has to dress up as a bishop, as I am now, and preaches a sermon to the rest of the congregation.
And when you did your sermon, what did you have to talk about?
I talked about what Christmas is like in other countries. So in Bulgaria and South Sudan and Sudan. And I talked about the war a bit as well.
And I hear that Henry VIII actually suspended this because it was going to their heads.
They were allowed to declare holidays and give loads of sweets and gifts to the rest of the choristers. So I can see why he did it.
Well, I won't keep you any longer and I'll let you go and take your seat on the bishop's throne.
Thank you.
What is the main purpose of this cathedral?
It's a living, working church. And this area now is dedicated to Amnesty International and prisoners of conscience. Someone that's put in prison for something they believe rather than a crime they've committed. And you can see on the north side the candle for prisoner of conscience, the barbed wire around the candle, that light comes through the darkness of the barbed wire. And we do pray for a named prisoner of conscience every morning at morning worship, and that prisoner of conscience is prayed for a whole month, which is very special. You know, it brings this medieval building into the 21st century.
This is really just such a lovely space. What does it mean to you personally?
It means everything. It took me a long time to find a place where I belonged, and Salisbury has achieved that. I'm in here most days. I am a Christian, even though we welcome non-Christians, young, old, rich and poor. Everybody is welcome in the cathedral. But this is a very special place, just to sit, pray, be quiet, and thank God for everything that we have around us.
I can see why. I agree with you. The history and beauty of Salisbury mean it's always been a great attraction. But since March last year, the city has received global attention for very sad and sinister reasons.
A former Russian spy is critical in hospital after a suspected poisoning in Salisbury.
The attack on Sergei Skripal and his daughter using the nerve agent Novichok shook the world. Though the Skripals survived, 4 months later, 2 other people were poisoned by the same substance and tragically, Dawn Sturgis died. For the city and the cathedral, it's been a very challenging time. Nick Papadopoulos began his new role as Dean of Salisbury just a short time after the attack.
What did you find when you first arrived in Salisbury?
What immediately struck me was on my walk down the high street towards the cathedral close. In every shop window there were paper doves hanging on strings. Very beautiful. And then I walked into the cathedral, and snaking their way down the aisle of the nave were hundreds of paper doves. And it was an art installation that the cathedral had commissioned that had then been adopted by the city. And the dove and the hashtag Salisbury City of Doves became for the whole community a symbol of unity, of hope, and of a desire for reconciliation.
How would you say that this has affected the city and indeed the cathedral?
In the first place, there's been a great deal of grief because at the heart of what happened there was a number of personal tragedies and lives were cruelly affected by what happened. And that's just a matter of deep sorrow. Also, of course, shock. How could an act of international conspiracy play itself out on our streets? It seemed incredible. But then, resolve. Salisbury has discovered, I think, that it's a very resilient place. We will not be defined by this. I think in the first place, the cathedral's a great symbol of constancy, and its daily rhythm of prayer and worship remains constant. So if the city has a heartbeat, I believe this is it.
Obviously last year was a really dark time for Salisbury, but are you hoping now that the darkness is lifting, and what are your hopes for the future?
This cathedral represents the belief that life will always overcome death, light will always overcome darkness. So as we go into Candlemas, I hope that this cathedral in particular can become a place where people can listen to one another and learn from one another in an atmosphere that is tolerant and respectful and polite, and that together we can grow as a community and grow stronger.
Next week, I'm being sent to the Tower of London, where it's thought the earliest surviving Valentine note was written in the 15th century. And we come right up to date when two young Christians go on a blind date.
It's been wonderful to celebrate Candlemas here in Salisbury and to remember the hope that came in Jesus, the light of the world. Well, we couldn't leave without one more hymn from this wondrous place of worship. Until next time, goodbye.
Tasty antique on the roadshow tonight. A World War I cook's recipe book. The hungry troops were fueled well. That's at 7. And there's plenty of hip movement in Poplar this evening. Hula hoops at the ready for Call the Midwife at 8.